Thank you so much for attending my PowerPoint presentation on Fallout's biggest creatures. First up is the Mirelurk Queen. The Mirelurk Queen is a 20-foot-tall crustacean matriarch that serves as the apex predator of Mirelurk colonies across the Capital Wasteland, Commonwealth, and Appalachia. This particular mutation represents what happens when you combine pre-war radiation with horseshoe crab DNA and apparently give it a grudge against humanity. The Queen features heavily armored plating across her entire carapace, a ranged acid spit attack that can melt through power armor, and the delightful ability to spawn Mirelurk hatchlings mid-combat to overwhelm anyone foolish enough to engage her near a body of water. Now, the Mirelurk Queen appears in Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and Fallout 76, which means 3 separate games worth of players have had the opportunity to learn basic weak point mechanics. And yet, somehow, the majority of you continue to unload entire magazines into her heavily armored shell, watching your damage numbers tick away at roughly 3 hit points per bullet, before eventually getting swarmed by hatchlings or melted by acid. The Queen has exactly 2 weak points, her face and her soft underbelly. Both of these glow, literally glow. The game is actively highlighting where you should aim. If you're struggling with this mechanic, I don't know what to tell you. The acid spit attack has considerable range and deals damage over time, which means even if you survive the initial hit, you get to watch your health bar drain while contemplating your life choices. On top of that, the Queen continuously spawns Mirelurk hatchlings throughout the encounter. These hatchlings are individually weak, but they serve the critical function of distracting players who lack basic target prioritization skills. You know what happens? You start shooting the hatchlings because they're closer and easier to kill, which feels productive, except the Queen is still alive and still spitting acid at you from across the pond. Congratulations, you got killed by seafood because you couldn't resist the dopamine hit of clearing ads instead of focusing the actual threat. The Mirelurk Queen is found exclusively near coastal areas and bodies of water, which makes perfect sense given her aquatic origins. What makes less sense is how many players willingly engage her in these exact locations, where she has environmental advantage, spawn support, and plenty of space to kite you around while you drown in hatchlings. Truly inspiring tactical decision-making. Let's move on to something that hits harder but requires marginally less strategic thinking to defeat. Behemoth. The super mutant Behemoth stands approximately 20 feet tall and represents the final evolutionary stage of prolonged FEV exposure over the course of decades or potentially centuries. This is what happens when a super mutant just keeps living and absorbing more forced evolutionary virus, resulting in a creature with massive size, extraordinary durability, devastating physical strength, and the intelligence of a particularly aggressive toddler. The Behemoth appears in Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and Fallout 76, giving players across 3 game installments the opportunity to experience the unique terror of watching a giant approach them while wielding either a fire hydrant attached to a metal pole or, in some cases, a shopping cart filled with debris as an improvised flail. Let that marinate for a second. The most advanced form of super mutant evolution, a creature that has survived longer than almost any other FEV subject in the wasteland, chooses to fight with street furniture. Not because it's strategic, but because the Behemoth is functionally too stupid to operate actual weapons. Regular super mutants can use guns, plan ambushes, and communicate in complete sentences. The Behemoth sees a fire hydrant and thinks, yes, this is the optimal tool for crushing humans. Which, to be fair, is objectively correct when you're 20 feet tall and can swing it with enough force to pulverize power armor. The iconic Behemoth encounters include GNR Plaza in Fallout 3, Boston Common in Fallout 4, and various locations throughout Fallout 76. These fights are designed as major combat events, often accompanied by a Fat Man launcher conveniently placed nearby, because the developers correctly assumed you'd need explosive ordnance to handle something with this much health. And yet, the number of players who panic during their first Behemoth encounter and waste every single bullet they own, shooting it in the torso with small arms fire, is truly staggering. You have a mini nuke launcher. Right there. The game put it there for you. But no, I'm sure your 10mm pistol will work great against a creature that has approximately 2,000 hit points and damage resistance that makes it nearly immune to conventional firearms. The best part? Players consistently attempt to melee behemoths. Just walk right up to the 20-foot giant with a sledgehammer and start swinging as if this is a fair fight. The behemoth then performs a ground slam attack that deals massive area damage, and you get to watch your health bar evaporate while contemplating why you thought this was a good idea. But don't worry, at least you died to a fire hydrant instead of a shopping cart. That's character growth. Next up is a creature that actually uses its brain, which somehow makes it more terrifying. Alpha Deathclaw. The Alpha Deathclaw, also known as the Deathclaw Matriarch in Fallout 4, stands between 9 and 10 feet tall and represents the largest and most dangerous standard Deathclaw variant in the franchise. These creatures are the result of pre-war genetic engineering by the United States military, which took Jackson's chameleon DNA, combined it with multiple other species for enhanced aggression and durability, then exposed the whole experiment to FEV for good measure. The military's goal was to create the perfect biological weapon for clearing trenches and fortified positions. They succeeded. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, they succeeded so well that these things are now the apex predator of the post-apocalyptic wasteland, and you get to deal with them armed with whatever garbage you scrape together from a destroyed civilization. Alpha Deathclaws serve as pack leaders, which means they're significantly more aggressive than regular Deathclaws and possess enhanced statistics across the board. They deal the highest damage per second of any standard Deathclaw variant, have increased health pools, and appear exclusively in endgame areas where the game assumes you're prepared for this level of threat. The game assumes incorrectly. What typically happens is this. You've killed a few regular Deathclaws by this point in your playthrough, maybe even a Savage or Glowing variant, and you feel confident in your ability to handle reptilian bioweapons. Then you encounter an Alpha Deathclaw, and it closes the distance between you in roughly 2 seconds before performing a melee attack that deals somewhere between 200 and 300 damage depending on difficulty settings. If you're wearing power armor, you survive this, barely. If you're not wearing power armor, you get to experience the exciting gameplay mechanic of instant death followed by a loading screen. The funniest thing about Alpha Deathclaws is the cognitive dissonance they create. You see it from a distance, you recognize it's a Deathclaw, and some part of your brain suggests that maybe, just maybe, you could sneak past it. You cannot sneak past it. Deathclaws have excellent perception, and Alpha variants are actively hunting for threats to their pack. The gap between I'll just crouch walk around this thing and I am now being disemboweled at 60 frames per second is approximately 4 seconds. But players attempt this maneuver constantly because optimism is apparently stronger than pattern recognition. On top of that, the number of players who express genuine shock that a creature, explicitly designed by the military to kill everything, dies exactly as intended is extraordinary. Yes, the pre-war government created an unkillable murder lizard. That was the whole point. Congratulations, you've discovered what bioweapon means. Up next is something that makes the Alpha Deathclaw look like a reasonable design decision by comparison. Liberty Prime. Liberty Prime stands 40 feet tall and represents the absolute pinnacle of Cold War paranoia, translated into functional military hardware. This bipedal combat robot was designed by the United States military as an anti-communist superweapon, equipped with eye-mounted laser cannons that fire mini-nukes, shoulder-mounted Mark 28 nuclear bombs, and a voice module programmed to deliver patriotic propaganda while actively vaporizing enemy combatants. The project was initiated before the Great War but never fully completed due to power supply issues, which is the only reason the entire planet didn't get steamrolled by a 40-foot freedom machine screaming about democracy. Liberty Prime appears in both Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 after being restored to functionality by the Brotherhood of Steel, who apparently looked at post-apocalyptic America and decided what it really needed was a giant robot that throws nuclear warheads at buildings. Now, Liberty Prime is technically not a creature in the biological sense. It's a machine. But it's on this list because it's absolutely massive, and more importantly, because excluding it would be cowardice. This thing weighs over 19,000 pounds, can punch through reinforced concrete, and delivers voice lines like democracy is non-negotiable and death is a preferable alternative to communism, with complete sincerity while obliterating everything in its path. The tonal dissonance between 1950s patriotic optimism and active nuclear warfare is peak American engineering, and I mean that as both a compliment and an indictment of Cold War military spending. The iconic Liberty Prime sequences occurred during the assault on the Purifier in Fallout 3 and the attack on the Institute in Fallout 4. In both cases, players accompany Liberty Prime as it marches toward the objective, throwing nuclear bombs at anything that remotely constitutes opposition. And here's what's hilarious. Players consistently act as though they're contributing to these fights. You're not. Liberty Prime is doing literally everything. You're just following behind it like a child watching their parent assemble furniture, occasionally shooting at debris while the robot handles the actual work. The Enclave throws vertibirds at it in Fallout 3. Liberty Prime shoots them down with laser eyes. The Institute sends synths in Fallout 4. Liberty Prime steps on them. Your participation is ceremonial at best. The voice lines deserve special recognition for being simultaneously the most patriotic and most terrifying dialogue in the franchise. Communism is the very definition of failure gets delivered right before Prime throws a nuclear warhead at a building, causing a mushroom cloud visible from across the map. It's propaganda, weapons platform, and existential commentary on military excess all wrapped into one 40-foot package. The fact that this seemed like a reasonable allocation of resources to pre-war America tells you everything you need to know about why the apocalypse happened. But sure, blame the Chinese. Moving on to something that actually qualifies as a living organism. Scorchbeast Queen. The Scorchbeast Queen is Fallout 76's primary raid boss, featuring a wingspan exceeding 30 feet and representing what happens when you mutate an already massive bat with the Scorched Plague, then decide to make it the centerpiece of your endgame content. This creature is directly tied to Fallout 76's main storyline as the source of the Scorched infection that wiped out Appalachia's population, and it can only be summoned by launching a nuclear warhead at specific fissure sites across the map. The Queen spawns additional Scorch Beasts during the encounter, uses a sonic scream attack that deals massive damage in a cone, and performs aerial bombardment runs that create lingering damage zones on the ground. The fight requires multiple well-equipped players, extensive preparation, and a fundamental understanding of MMO raid mechanics, which is where approximately 70% of participants immediately fail. Let's talk about the solo players first. The Scorch Beast Queen has roughly 32,000 hit points and significant damage resistance across all types. This is raid boss scaling. This is content explicitly designed for coordinated group play, and yet, without fail, there are players who show up to Fisher site events with a hunting rifle and 400 rounds of .308 ammunition, genuinely believing they're going to solo this encounter because they managed to kill a regular Scorch Beast once. You're not going to solo it. Your damage output is insufficient. Your ammunition reserves will be exhausted before you remove 20% of her health pool. But don't let basic mathematics stop you from trying. The Sonic Scream attack creates a visible green cone of damage extending from the Queen's position. If you stand in the green cone, you take damage. This is, objectively, one of the simplest mechanics in gaming. The game color codes the danger zone for you. And still, every single Scorch Beast Queen event features multiple players standing directly in the Scream's path, tanking completely avoidable damage, then wondering why they keep dying. I don't know what to tell you. Move out of the green. It's not a request. It's basic pattern recognition. On top of that, the Queen spawns additional Scorch Beasts throughout the fight, which serve as adds that need to be managed by the group. But here's what actually happens. Players develop tunnel vision on the Queen herself, ignoring the adds entirely, and then get overwhelmed when 3 Scorch Beasts are simultaneously screaming at them from different angles. Congratulations, you failed to prioritize targets in a raid encounter. The game gave you adds specifically to test your ability to manage multiple threats, and you failed. The ammunition economy in this fight is genuinely punishing. Most players will expend between 2,000 and 5,000 rounds depending on their build and weapon choice, which represents a significant portion of their total reserves. The reward for succeeding is ultracite ore and the satisfaction of completing endgame content. The reward for failing is a repair bill and the knowledge that you just burned through a week's worth of ammunition for nothing. Truly inspiring resource management. Next up is something that doesn't require raid coordination, but will still absolutely demolish you. Fog Crawler. The Fog Crawler is a 12 to 15 foot tall mutation native to the island in Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC, and it holds the distinction of being the most damage-resistant creature in the entire game. This particular abomination is the result of pre-war experimentation on mantis shrimp, which, if you're familiar with marine biology, are already pound for pound one of the most devastating predators in Earth's oceans. Mantis shrimp can strike with the force of a .22 caliber bullet and boil the water around their claws through sheer cavitation. Now imagine that creature exposed to decades of radioactive fog, scaled up to the size of a small truck, and given enhanced aggression protocols. That's a fog crawler. It functions as an ambush predator in the island's dense radioactive fog, delivers devastating melee attacks that can kill players in 2 hits, and applies poison damage over time that continues draining your health long after the initial strike. Here's the thing about fog crawlers that players consistently fail to understand. They are tankier than Deathclaws, not slightly tankier, significantly tankier. A fog crawler has comparable health to an alpha Deathclaw, but possesses dramatically higher damage resistance and energy resistance values, which means your weapons deal reduced damage on every single hit. You can unload an entire magazine from a combat rifle into a fog crawler's face and watch its health bar move approximately 15%. This is not a bug. This is intentional design. The creature is specifically engineered to absorb punishment, and the developers placed it in Far Harbor's high-level areas under the assumption that players would recognize the threat and adjust their tactics accordingly. Players did not adjust their tactics accordingly. The reputation gap between Deathclaws and fog crawlers is genuinely fascinating from a game design perspective. Deathclaws are iconic. Everyone knows Deathclaws are dangerous. You see a Deathclaw, you respect it, you prepare for the fight, you maybe even run away if you're undergeared. But fog crawlers? They're shrimp, just big shrimp. How threatening could a shrimp possibly be? And then it closes the distance in roughly 3 seconds, performs a melee attack that deals 200 plus damage, applies a poison effect that ticks for another 50 damage over the next 10 seconds, and you're suddenly reloading a save file while reconsidering your understanding of the food chain. The mantis shrimp base is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. In nature, mantis shrimp are apex predators that can break aquarium glass and split human fingers open with their strikes. They have some of the most complex eyes in the animal kingdom and can see polarized light. They're basically underwater murder machines. Scale that up, add radiation, give it Far Harbor's fog for ambush cover, and you have a creature that makes Deathclaws look reasonable by comparison. But sure, keep using your pipe pistol. I'm sure that'll work out great against a creature with 4,250 damage resistance. Truly inspiring weapon choice. Next up is something that technically doesn't fight back, which somehow makes the player behavior surrounding it even more pathetic. Ghoul Whale. The Ghoul Whale is a 40 to 50 foot long creature visible offshore in certain Fallout 4 coastal locations, and it represents peak Bethesda energy in terms of partial partially implemented content that remained in the game files despite serving no functional purpose. This creature is technically killable through the use of long-range weaponry such as artillery strikes or Fat Man launchers fired from shore, and upon death, it yields standard whale meat items identical to what you'd receive from any other creature in the game. There are no direct encounters with the ghoul whale. It does not attack you. It does not acknowledge your presence. It simply exists offshore, swimming in a predetermined pattern, completely passive, until players discovered its existence and immediately decided it needed to die. The ghoul whale is estimated to be between 40 and 50 feet in length based on its in-game model, making it one of the largest creatures in the entire Fallout franchise by sheer physical dimensions. It appears to be a reference to Moby Dick, as there are lore terminals on the island in Far Harbor that reference a Captain Ahab character obsessed with hunting a great whale, which is about as subtle as Bethesda gets with literary references. The creature itself is cut content that was never fully implemented into gameplay, but was left active in the game world, where it was eventually documented by the community through a combination of curiosity, boredom, and the fundamental human need to kill things that exist. Let's talk about the player behavior surrounding this discovery. The moment the community confirmed that the ghoul whale was killable, players began dedicating actual hours of real-world time to the task of murdering a defenseless creature that poses zero threat and yields garbage-tier loot. The process involves setting up artillery at coastal settlements, calculating trajectory angles, firing dozens of shells into the ocean, and then swimming out to collect approximately 6 pieces of whale meat worth 15 caps total. The risk-to-reward ratio here is non-existent. You are expending resources, time, and effort to kill something that doesn't fight back in exchange for meat you could get from shooting a radstag for 3 seconds. This is peak player behavior, truly inspiring dedication to pointless violence. The absurdity of artillery striking a whale for science cannot be overstated. You're standing on the shore of post-apocalyptic Massachusetts. You've somehow managed to rebuild artillery capabilities in a settlement that barely has running water, and you're using that military technology to kill wildlife in the ocean. The pre-war military would be proud. You've taken their weapon systems and applied them to the important work of murdering endangered species for negligible material gain. Congratulations, you've achieved ecological destruction for no reason. That's character development. On top of that, Bethesda just left it in the game. The ghoul whale serves no purpose, has no associated quests, provides no unique items, and yet it's fully modeled, animated, and programmed to drop loot when killed. Someone at Bethesda created this creature, someone else decided it wasn't worth implementing properly, and then nobody bothered to remove it from the final build. And honestly, that's the most Bethesda thing imaginable. Let's move on to the actual biggest creature, which at least has the decency to fight back. Ancient Behemoth. The Ancient Behemoth stands over 25 feet tall and represents the largest super mutant variant in the Fallout franchise, making the standard Behemoth from Section 2 look like a reasonable size by comparison. This creature is a Fallout 76 endgame world boss that has been exposed to FEV for literal centuries, resulting in enhanced size, massively increased health pools that exceed 10,000 hit points, devastating damage output, and somehow even less intelligence than a regular behemoth. If you thought the inverse relationship between size and cognitive function had reached its limit at 20 feet, you were wrong. The ancient behemoth has grown an additional 5 feet and lost whatever remaining brain cells were coordinating basic problem solving. It can no longer remember what fire hydrants are for. It just throws boulders now. The boulder throwing attacks deserve special recognition for being both hilarious and lethal. The ancient behemoth will pick up environmental debris, rocks, and chunks of destroyed buildings, then hurl them at players with shocking accuracy and range. These projectiles deal between 300 and 500 damage depending on your level, scaling, and damage resistance, which means if you're not in power armor or don't have significant defensive buffs active, you're getting one shot by sedimentary geology. Getting killed by a thrown rock in a game with energy weapons, missile launchers, and plasma rifles is genuinely embarrassing. How pathetic. Ancient behemoths spawn as world boss events in Fallout 76, which means they're designed for coordinated group play with multiple players focusing fire and managing aggro. This is raid level content. And yet, without fail, there are solo players who see the event notification, fast travel to the location, and genuinely believe they're going to solo a 25-foot tall endgame boss with a lever action rifle and personal determination. You cannot solo an ancient behemoth unless you have a min-maxed build, legacy weapons, and a fundamental understanding of damage mitigation mechanics. If you're showing up in regular combat armor with 800 rounds of .45 ammunition, you're not contributing to the fight. You're a spectator with delusions of competence. The intelligence to size ratio has now reached its logical extreme. At 25 feet tall, the ancient behemoth possesses roughly the cognitive capacity of a particularly aggressive potato. It doesn't use tactics. It doesn't retreat when injured. It doesn't recognize threats. It sees movement. It throws boulder. Movement stops. This is the entirety of its decision-making process. Centuries of survival, growth, and FEI mutation have produced a creature that is physically unstoppable, but mentally comparable to a landslide. which frankly is what it basically is at this point. A mobile landslide that hates you specifically. The ancient behemoth represents the culmination of everything wrong with FEV experimentation. The virus was designed to create super soldiers with enhanced strength and intelligence. Instead, it created a 25-foot giant that communicates exclusively through roaring and can be distracted by literally anything that moves. Peak pre-war military science. Congratulations, you've reached the biggest creature in the Fallout franchise, and it's a testament to humanity's ability to make things worse through scientific hubris. In conclusion, Fallout's biggest creatures range from terrifying to absurd, and you should absolutely encounter them. If you enjoyed this PowerPoint presentation, I made others, and you should absolutely check them out. Peace on planet Earth.